Number 8.
Yep.
A translated work you feel deserves recognition.
Deserves more recognition. So yeah, like I was gonna say like War and Peace for this one, but War and Peace has a lot of recognition already. It's considered one of the greatest novels of like all time.
Right.
There is this book called Go. I'll put like a picture of it here because I don't know the name of the author and the full title of it. But basically, Go actually got a lot of recognition in Japan.
It's a Japanese book.
It's a Japanese book written by a Japanese author. Got a lot of recognition for it. It was a movie made for it, but not so much outside of Japan. And it just made its way to the States recently.
Okay.
I read it, I think in February. Not February. Read it earlier this year. Basically, it's about a Korean boy who's living in Japan and trying to struggle.
And this is a fairly modern book?
Very modern. It's written like,
I
think like late 90s, early 2000s. And it is about a Korean boy Korean teenager who's it's basically kind of a coming of age story, but not really. It's kind of like a coming of age / love story, trying to find your identity story. And basically, what he's trying to do is, he's Korean. He lives in Japan, and it kind of examines what life is like for Koreans who are considered second-class citizens in Japan.
Because they have all that.
Because there's a lot of history between like Koreans, because Japan took over Korea,
the rape of Nanking and the women that were involved,
right? There's comfort women and stuff like that. So there's a lot of history going on there, and there's still like some discrimination against Koreans in Japan.
Well, it's offensive if you mistake them for one another because they still have a lot of
there's a lot of animosity. So, but goes I felt for me because I had never really even thought of the subject. I felt like this was a really eye-opening book.
Right.
I didn't think it ended as well as it could have.
Right.
But the subject matter itself and how it was handled, I thought was really good.
Interesting. I didn't think I would have a contribution, but while you were talking, I thought of, you ever heard of Journey to the West?
No, I haven't. Oh, wait. I vaguely remember.
Okay. So I actually just had to look it up now. It's by Wu Chang-en. The best way I could describe it, or at least what I know of it, is that it's just kind of like this epic, right? It's about the Monkey King, and he collects the whatever he's got to collect, and he journeys, and it's a road trip. So Dragon Ball. Because like the Monkey King will show up in a lot of like these like Hong Kong Chinese movies,
right.
And it's also extremely influential in anime, which is really overpowering the West right now, in my opinion. It's got a huge hold culturally. And this is kind of their big epic, and I find we don't really talk about Asian literature at all.
We don't really talk about it as much. Like, I want to read The Romance of Three Kingdoms at some point, because that's like a huge epic. It's like, in terms of size, like it's like up there with War and Peace.
Okay.
In terms of size. But it's really hard to find a good, affordable copy of The Romance of Three Kingdoms. But yeah, you're right. We don't really talk a lot, or have a lot of translated, I think, like, Asian literature, at least in the mainstream.
It's gotten better now, and I think, people like Penguin's Classic and the Oxford editions do their job at getting these great works. I mean, they're always doing updated versions of, like, Gilgamesh and that kind of stuff. It's like, who cares? Well, there's people that care. So, Journey to the West, and then another one, if it's not the first novel ever published, it's one of the first, was A Tale of Genji, which is
sounds really familiar.
Japanese, if I'm not mistaken, and that's another big epic, and it's another one of those like the Dostoevsky or the Tolstoys where you read them and you're like, fuck, it's like it's something of value,
right?
And it's a work that they had a copy at Barnes and I was really surprised. I was like, dude, it's awesome that they have it in the first place. So moving on to
question 9.
A work of nonfiction you feel needs to be studied. And
all right, so working nonfiction I feel needs to be studied. I'm actually gonna not just point out one particular work, but kind of like an era.
Okay.
This is a book that I read. I think there are a whole bunch of like topics in nonfiction that need to be.
Sure.
But from ones that I've read this past year, the book "The Storm Before the Storm" by Mike Duncan, which is about the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic.
This is the podcast.
This is the podcast guy, and you guys have heard about me talk about this guy because he's one of my favorite podcasters. But everyone talks about Julius Caesar, Pompey, Cassius, the triumvirate that they made, and how that all figured into the Civil War that happened. But most people don't know about the generation before. They don't know about Sulla and how, like, basically, or Marius, and how basically you had a guy.
See, like you're saying these things, I have no idea.
Right, and these are guys who basically like transformed Rome, took Rome, or like even what was their names? There's these two brothers Tiberius, I think Gaius. What was their last
The guys
name?
that founded Rome?
No, not they didn't found Rome, but it was these two brothers. What is their last name? I forget their last name, but they're very famous in Roman history because they basically this is a guy. He comes to the Senate with a plan that says like, hey, and this was started the whole basically. Like Duncan says, this was started. The beginning of the end started at this point. Guy comes to the Senate and says, hey, let's redistribute land.
Okay.
Right? That was the big thing. No one wants to do that because whoever does distribute the land is going to get credit because a lot of people need the land.
Right.
And no one wants one single person to get credit for that.
It's almost like a socialist.
I was say, you can say it's kind of like a socialist idea, but back then in Rome it was like socialist, like what
Yeah.
But basically, what happened was Rome at this point is as rich as heck.
Right.
But there's a lot of inequality because it only stays at the top. People at the bottom are going off to fight wars, and when they come back, their land is in debt, so they have to sell off their land, and they're poor. So he wanted to build more land, and from that bill, the Senate, of course, went past it, so he went straight to the people, which almost never been done. And then he decided to become elected as tribune again when he wasn't supposed to.
And this is before...
This is before Julius Caesar. Now, this wasn't written into law that he wasn't supposed to become tribune, but he was, but it was like tradition that you just didn't do it. So a lot of the traditions in this period before Julius Caesar began to be broken. Violence was for the first time used in this period as a political force. Like, we just gonna go and smash the dude's head in and be done with it. Right. And so a lot of political tradition changed in this era. So I think if we looked at a lot more, we can understand the Julius Caesar era a bit better. Because it's not like this stuff didn't start with Julius Caesar and his gang of people.
So you're saying there's an incomplete understanding of Roman history?
And people don't generally focus on that. We focus on the exciting things that happened in Julius Caesar's day, even though this period is just as exciting too.
Okay.
But not so much focus has been shined on this, as in the events that actually. It's kind of like looking at just the Civil War, but not looking at what happened leading up to the American Civil War. Like we talk about Abraham Lincoln, we talk about like Robert E. Lee,
right?
But
you
don't talk about
like
the
stuff
people
that happened before.
We don't talk about so much like the compromises.
There was that one dude, just like what was it? He was blowing up trains and stealing from ships.
So John Brown, the rebellion happened before.
That guy was awesome. I think he was great.
Yeah, so there's some stuff there that's not really public knowledge.
Okay.
It's really interesting, and so I think that's a period that needs to stay. And of course, there's a host of other nonfiction books out there.
Right.
In history that is not Western that I think needs to be spotlighted too.
Oh, hey, I think I forgot something now that we're getting there. You said Ernest Hemingway is overrated, right?
I did.
I forgot to remember who I was going to trash today.
Oh, so
you're going to hate me.
You say you were going to trash the writer of 1984,
George
Orwell.
Yeah. Okay, so before I continue, it's not that it's a bad book. Let's just start there. It's not a bad book. It sold millions of copies. It's gotten taught at schools. There's a reason it gets discussed so much. However, I feel that Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, exactly, see, you're grunting because it's the truth, it's a superior book. It predicted stuff much better. It has so much more substance and themes than 1984. Because 1984 predicted that you'd have a totalitarian state that would ban knowledge and that would be constantly governing you. And that may or not be true because, well, you have like kind of surveillance network and the post 9/11 Patriot Act and all that. Okay, so that's true. But then Aldous Huxley predicted that knowledge would be freely available, but then the people would be too busy being distracted. And it's kind of funny I said this on a YouTube video, right? Because you're here, you're watching this. Arguably, there's better stuff you could be doing with your life, right? so that's my whole thing, is I find that was a better forecast of what would happen. And while I'm not saying 1984 is a bad book, I think Brave New World was far more accurate and is more meaningful. So for that reason, I think we need to reevaluate and give that book just as much attention as 1984.
All right, so this is what we're going to do. What we're going to do is I'm going to reread 1984. I'm going to read for the first time in Brave New World.
Do it.
And then we should have a discussion video.
I got to reread them myself because it's been a while.
And we'll reread them, and once we reread them, we can have a video discussing which one is better.
1 year later.
At
the rate I read books, it's going to take forever.
I mean, at this point, it'll be the anniversary of this video.
That would be great. That would be great.
We'll be back. All right, and so for the very last question, If you could teach any 5 literature-based classes, um, whether they exist in some form or you would create them, what would they be? And for me, some of the ones I said were themes and like important themes in graphic novels. Because I think
Sure.
graphic novel medium, a lot of people just kind of dismiss it, but there are some really good gems in there, and even in like some of the Cape heroes, like Vision, Tom King's
Yeah,
Vision
you talked about
was
Tom King's
absolutely
Vision.
amazing, and I think that like I don't think you should just because it has like a lot of people kind of just say like, oh, it's Superman, Batman, and just the same story you heard before. There's some actually some pretty good stories, even in those.
Well, even in the capes,
Yeah, in the Capes, there are some
even,
really good stories there.
was it the you have the classic Batman stories, the Dark Knight Returns.
Dark Knight Returns.
What's another one? Killing Joke,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really disturbing graphic novel. If you ever read it, really, it is kind of gross. It's, I mean, it's like one step away from showing you rape.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
it is.
it's absolutely disgusting.
Watchmen
Watchmen,
was just another like big, like big.
which the postmodernists should love, but I don't know why they haven't taken it.
Yeah, that one. Kingdom Come honestly was a great one.
Kingdom Come is fantastic.
Well, from DC, Kingdom Come basically. So a different world. The heroes have gotten the original heroes like the Justice League. They've gotten older and their kids are taking over. And then it's kind of looking at one guy is actually asked, a pastor actually is asked to decide the fate of the coming battle, basically quote unquote Armageddon, which is big fight between
Right.
the superheroes and stuff like
And
that.
and part of that is like, the classic old versus young,
Yeah.
but it goes so much deeper than that. I think a lot of the Gray Capes stories have asked what would actually happen in a world of heroes,
Right.
and that one directly
And that
tackles
one's,
it
yeah, it does.
because it's generational now.
Yeah, because it's like, all right, so now you have the originals. Now you have kids that are trying to live up to them, but they have a whole
Exactly.
different set of values.
Exactly.
They may be willing to go their step and actually kill people, whereas
Yeah.
the old generation may not. How does that affect relations between humans and superheroes
Right,
at that point?
right.
So yeah, that did a really good job at doing that one. Another one I
Yeah.
think I said was great works of nonfiction because nonfiction doesn't really get enough love.
No, it doesn't.
Um,
It's not exciting.
it's not. Yeah, it's not exciting as like some of the books out here that people read. That works of fiction. But I think
Right.
that there's some really good gems. You can really learn a lot. I mean, one of my favorite books is a nonfiction book called Endurance, which is about the expedition under Shackleton to Antarctica, which failed, but
Right.
still was a great story because he ended up surviving the ice for like a year and a half or something like
Mm.
that. Dan became the first person to trek over like the island of South Georgia. Just 3 of them, like maybe 10 yards of like some rope, and like a small axe, and they did it unsupported across the island just because they had to. So they still, even though they didn't get to cross the continent, they did end up doing something great. So I
Right.
think there are some great works of nonfiction out there,
Sure.
whether it be philosophy or history or biographies.
So you're saying like more like a well-rounded
A
approach.
well-rounded approach, kind of like here on my channel. Like I like to have like fiction, nonfiction. I like to have a little bit of everything: fiction, nonfiction, some graphic novels, some
Right.
poems or plays. Just because when you focus on one particular thing, you can kind of lose out on all the other great stuff that's out there.
Right.
And I'm not perfect yet. I mean, most of my nonfiction have been histories.
Sure.
They haven't been like necessarily biographies or philosophies or things like that. So I may incorporate more of that stuff going forward. But
Right.
just trying to the course would be like looking here. Here's some great works in nonfiction that I think you should read.
It's interesting. They have the survey courses. They'll be like world literature, the coming of age theme, and I think that's good. But they should take it a step further. You're saying where people get so specialized in their field that they forget that there's a real world these works came from.
Right.
Like I was discussing with you earlier, for example, Darwin's The Origin of Species. You're like, well, that was a book on science and evolution, and it's important for that. No, it's important for a lot
it
of
actually
stuff.
influences a lot of
Well,
philosophy going forward.
Without that, you wouldn't have the naturalist theater that like Henrik Ibsen and August Strindberg did.
Right,
Or
or
when-
you wouldn't have like social Darwinism, which
wouldn't have
said
social
that
Darwinism.
like certain groups of people belong on certain levels.
Right, and even that heritage gets dragged even further to Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey in the Night, because that whole play is about addiction within a family. And you can have addiction within a family if you don't have the belief in heredity and that man is a product of his environment. So history is an absolute must. I think if you're really reading something well, you also understand the history of the world it was built in.
Yeah, those definitely.
And you have to understand the science that people believed in that time.
The context, essentially.
The context is so important.
It's so important, especially when interpreting what it's trying to say.
Right.
Because you can interpret it in where you are in the context that you're in.
And it might work.
And it might work.
Right.
But it's also, you have to realize that guy is writing for a particular audience.
Exactly.
He may be projecting into the future. But
Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I actually listened to this podcast where, to us, it's the classic story of Christmas and blah, blah. To him, it was a social work where he was critiquing how English systems at that time would allow child labor.
Right.
And he was calling for these traditional values. It's like, well, children shouldn't have to work, and maybe families being together are a good thing.
Right.
And that wasn't revolutionary. It was more just like a wake-up call, and people were like, you know what? This Christmas thing, it should be about the family.
Right.
And, well, there you have modern Christmas. You know?
Another one that I think a good course would be were books that changed the world, like The Origin of Species.
Origin of Species.
No, yeah, you definitely have to talk about the Bible in there. Definitely
all the
Quran,
major sacred texts.
Sacred texts, because those were big forces in history.
They're the backbone of whatever society wrote that.
Right. Exactly. Common Sense, I would say, by Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
Especially if you talk about
the
American
age
Revolution.
did he do the Age of Reason?
Someone I think he may have did the Age of Reason. There's a book by Immanuel Kant that's studying a big foundational book in philosophy. I think you could talk even about Freud and Carl Jung's works.
Yeah.
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche.
Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations.
Right.
Capitalism. Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital.
Because these are the ideas that end up shaping a whole century.
Right, whole centuries.
Yeah.
Whole centuries, and in some cases, ending lives. I mean,
sure.
Capitalism, you have children working 9, 15, 20 hours in the place, people getting injured, and people saying, well, okay, whatever.
And then you have the great famines.
The great famines from the socialist and communist societies in Russia and China and
even Korea now.
Yeah, so you have these books have influenced the world and have influenced lives. Right. So I think that a course looking at those books would be good.
Important. Yeah.
Do you have any course ideas?
I think I think that, again, a lot of what I'm saying comes from the academic circle because I'm still in college and all that. But a lot of praise for works in the English language still is the whole heritage of the British, whatever. And I think their stuff is great, and I dig their stuff. But we have such a great body of work that is purely American and purely great in its own that kind of gets skimmed over.
I agree. There's a lot of focus on let's close this out. Yeah, there's a lot of focus on big Victorian literature. It's a big
Victorian
thing, right?
literature.
And I think American literature does tend to get lost. I mean, you probably have someone to name great novels. They're probably more well versed in, if they're not academics, in The Christmas Carol.
Right.
And stuff like
Jane
that.
Austen.
Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility.
The Romantics.
Right. Read in myself, I'm probably guilty of this. Then American literature.
Yeah, and part of the problem is that it's relatively young.
Yeah, it is younger than I was saying the English tradition, but still though, I mean American literature kind of comes into its own in maybe the late 1800s.
I think that
would say late 1800s.
With Hawthorne and Edgar Allan Poe, that whole late 19th century.
Late 19th century, you have Emily Dickinson writing and people like that. So it is a bit younger, but I still think it's still in America we don't focus on as much.
I think we should.
I think we still look back to them and these are the great giants.
Yes. Without getting overly nationalistic,
right.
Because that has its own problems. Is we should look at our stuff. Our country has created some pretty good literature.
Yeah,
and maybe our country wouldn't be so self-destructive and so self-depreciating that our generation really loves to do. All these memes about depression and self-loathing, they're funny. I don't think it's healthy.
Right.
but that's a side point.
So yeah, so that is the end of this tag video. What I'm actually going to do is split this into two parts.
Mm.
So because we're like at the 36-minute mark.
Yeah. Well, I got a lot longer than I
Yeah,
planned
so
on.
so yeah, we're at the 36-minute mark. So yeah, I'm gonna end here. I want to thank Sergio for joining me for this tag.
Pleasure.
And as for you, if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more from me, you can subscribe. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at GhostReach28 and also on Goodreads. The link to that is down in the description box.
You'll also see him when you're throwing out your garbage. You'll see him right there. He's trash.
Oh my goodness. So as always, guys, keep reading.